Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you on April the 2nd. It would be a lot better picture if it was April the 1st. Uh, However, we'll get along with that. Oh, sorry, I forgot to comb my hair. There, better. This is a question from Ian Reimer. Did I get it right? Reimer? I'm sorry, Ian. I keep calling you Reimer. And next time we're talking, you make sure I repeat your name about 100 times because my brain doesn't hang on to it. So I apologize. It says, hi, everybody. We have our main soul. We just have a soul, from my perspective, that pours consciousness into our many past and future lives. Are there any techniques to merge and link these lives for the benefit and development of this one? There's a little bit of a dilemma here in the understanding of what happens. And I can only do this from my perspective. The soul idea or the engagement with the soul is basically a form through which energy comes. Well, that means if our body is energy, our emotions are energy, and our mind or our mental facility is energetic, then it's actually a part of the soul. But depending on who you talk to and who's speaking about these kinds of things, you look at it and say, well, that's true, perhaps, that this form that we have, this so-called personality that we have, is actually a part of the soul, because as energy comes through, we construct personality physically, emotionally, and mentally, because we grow from very small form to a larger form. That's because life force lies within us. So actively we become a living human being, a bipedal form, literally. Unfortunately, we're identified very, very strongly with the idea that we are us. Me has a name. My name is important. In the scheme of mindless being, in the scheme of beings that are related to thinking of individuality as of primary importance, me equals important. Even if you have a negative approach to life, that negative approach becomes very important to the individual that is expressing it. There's a vitality that lies within the flow that comes down through that energetic form or soul, usually expressed, that form or energy is expressing through a form that relates to chakras, well, or Zephyroth. And this usually has an Eastern twinge on it. And in the Western world, if you look at philosophy, nobody wants to really talk about those things because they can't perceive them. Well, partly that's true. Partly that's not true. In the Western world, if we talk about those things to people who have no perception of those things, we are then dealing with the world of fantasy because a large number of people don't really perceive those forms, energetic forms. And I know I've often said those forms have within them little small zephyrs or expressions of previous lives that we've already been involved with. Yeah, that seems to be true for some, not true for everybody. once again, we run into the dilemma. If you cannot perceive something, nothing exists. This is a pretty strong philosophical background orientation in the Western world. So we have to be somewhere in between this kind of an idea. So how do you explain something that few people perceive? How do you explain something that some people relate to through their belief system and not through experience, yet believe they are experiencing something of this nature? It's very difficult because in our Western approach, we want to have all our ideas defined so that we feel more comfortable with the words that are going to be used in not only explanation, but in dialogue. We run into a lot of problems with this. So in that particular way of looking at things, all you can do is express what you think through your experience. And if your experience relates to belief, then you're talking through the belief of others or the experience of others. This causes a major problem because if you don't know something, you manipulate concepts and ideas to get to a place where you can actually begin to try and explain it not only to others but to yourself. So that's a dilemma. Well, all that energy that's expended relates to the flow that operates through the soul, and I see that form as a series of valves. There seems to be an automatic internalized structure that adjusts those energies moving through the valves so that we can move slowly into an understanding that we are presenting perhaps to others, but to ourselves, so that we can legitimately say, this explanation does not harmonize with something unknown within me that seems to be trying to help me understand a truth. That harmonization sense, or the sense of engagement with some form of internalization, relates often to belief, here we go again, and words and rules and regulations, symbols, language, if you will, that we feel comfortable with based on what we can perceive or not perceive and relate only to belief. Here we go again, running into the same difficulty. So, in talking about this thing, I'm expressing a relationship with the West and the East. If you can perceive those energies, or at least have a tendency to perceive increased intensity in areas where those chakras exist, you are actually perceiving the intensity of that chakra movement or flow operating through that valve, that chakra, or Zephyroth, whatever you want to call it. If you do not perceive this dialogue is only a lecture and a dialogue. If you can perceive these things, then you are perceiving where this works internally for you, at least little bit by little bit. And you're beginning to note that all that is perceived may not be conceived by a Western process of engaging with ideas. So what I mention here is, if the soul is operating in you and you are perceiving it, you are then perceiving chakras being stimulated. What you don't know, or may know, is that there is a flow moving through you and into you, and you might perceive that, but you may not realize that you're using that flow for the purpose of constructing a system And because you are unconsciously constructing it, and some are attempting to do conscious things with this, because you are constructing it, there's a certain level of personalization that occurs with this. And this we call the personalities form or the personality. And we have a kind of a rigid way of perceiving this. And we do that so that we're protecting ourselves in a kind of a way. If you come up with an idea, for example, just an idea, or let's say the idea happens to be in your head, you express the idea and you believe the idea is yours. Here's another way of looking at that. Your intellect has reached the point where you can allow yourself not to personalize everything that goes through your head. Therefore, you're willing to notice what goes through your head. Now, if you have a tremendously wonderful idea, you might have a propensity to call it yours. But in fact, it may not be. It might be a perception of a mentality, a little bit of an energetic form that as it expresses itself through your head, from mind, one can say, a mind plane, you perceive it's bursting into language. It bursts, language expresses itself, and you understand because it's bursting into the language of you. It's using the head of you to understand what that language is. So it will speak your language because it's operating through that cage or that brain that's set up and has learned how to hear, how to see, how to make sense of internally, at least to some degree. This is very difficult for the personalized intellect to make sense of, because we know for sure anything that passes through our head is ours. It's our head. It's even in psychology expressed as nothing can go into your head that hasn't been experienced by you. I'm hopeful one day that will change, but nonetheless, many people have experienced this not to be true. Many things that occur in your head are that way. Many are not. Provided you're okay or have been trained internally to reconsider your relationship with mind. There's a tremendous level of intellectual processing that relates to various kinds of logic, some that do not relate to any kind of logic, but relate specifically to concentration on a subject matter and ideas presented within the confines of this box in such a manner as to be noted by you. That is often called something like this. The unconscious gets involved and you have many questions, and while you're doing almost everything else on the planet, all of a sudden your head comes up with an answer. I think there's some truth in that, but I do not believe that that's the only truth that exists in that. Relationship that we have with this one, if we have our main soul, I would say if you are an aspect of the soul. Some people even refuse to use the word soul. And that's okay with me, but how will they explain? They just say, well, there's no such thing as a soul. You have chakras, and I call that, well, that's soul, whatever. In potential, all of these systems can move in a direction to be firing on all cylinders. But each cylinder slowly becomes functional more and more and more and more. Now, just a minute. Not even one cylinder operates without affecting another. Therefore, if you have an opening in a chakra, for example, that the flow can operate into that is different than what you're previously used to, all other chakras are affected. Not necessarily in a nanosecond, but as time goes on, because all of these systems operate to support each other. This presents a problem to our belief system. We have a structure individually noted with 7 to 10 players in it, and that's only the beginning. And these players interact together, support each other's development, no matter what level that particular development could be on. Doesn't matter. At this basic level of our relationship with living life, if more energy comes through the heart or the brow or the throat or the crown, because the lower systems can handle it, at least to some degree, then what you're really saying in English is more energy is coming through the personality. And the personality is intensely set on protecting how it was yesterday. There's a system set up for that, a defensive system. It's profoundly helpful then to move slowly through the development of that formation where all systems are broadened out. When they're broadened out individually, they affect each other. Now, why would they affect each other? Now, this is this soul orientation. They affect each other to help each other prepare for the next move. And this is continual. Now, if you're going to have a personality and you're going to engage on a daily basis, you have to feel comfortable with engaging with others on a daily basis. You have all the images that you constructed in a personality for purposes that relate to and help others to understand your version of personalization that is currently being used by you so that you will be accepted by others and also thought of as valuable by others. Ultimately, the soul doesn't have any interest in that, from my perspective. But it does have a tremendous interest in developing a system through which more energy can operate and help others to develop a system through which more energy can operate. That's often called spiritual growth. You can understand how this would be very disconcerting if an individual memorizes everything in 100 books that relates to a group of people and finds out that what they're really looking for is their own development, not following the rights, wrongs, and do's and don'ts of another's development, even though it might be very important. And in fact, what I'm not saying is that it isn't important to do such a thing, because I believe it is. Learn from others, but don't necessarily defend against internal growth. There's a tremendous kindness in the works of all people who have written anything, talked about anything, but it may not relate exactly the same way to you. And that is viable. Mostly, if people memorize the works of others, they at least will be aware within themselves as something like that happens to them, and they won't be afraid. Fear is a very large part of the dilemma that faces each and every person who continues on the pathway to more energy operating through you for the benefit of others. See, it isn't only for the benefit of you. It's for the benefit of your understanding, but at the same time, it's to the aid of others in relationship to living life. And living life is precious because of that very one thing. It's a key. As you grow, others can be affected by your capacity to handle more energy operating through a particular valve or chakra or zevara. It's not because of their personality and how they do things that you're going to grow. It's because of the flow that can operate through relative to the frequencies that are already operating through you. And you might believe that those frequencies, or what those frequencies are, you might believe that, but those frequencies are changing all the time. And there are many frequencies within a frequency. A little complicated there, because we go into a rather logical way of seeing this. This frequency is this frequency is that, this frequency is this. We often relate that to an emotional dispositional structure. Lots of material written on that. You can find that almost anywhere. This color means this color means that. And yes, it might. But all frequencies have the coarsest level that lies within them. And there is movement into the most subtle level, the gentlest, loving level on all frequencies. We're not too keen on that idea because it messes up some of our belief systems, but nonetheless, it's still there. Ian's question relates to the utilization of past lives and future lives that are involved with each and every one of these chakras. Because all of these systems, almost like a pixel, but just little whirling, little tiny pixelized formations that are miniatures of a whole lifetime. They are not only on the physical level, but they're on so-called magnetic or etheric levels, but also emotional levels, also mental levels. When these systems are functional in a person who's already here, at least to some degree, then energies can operate through them and move to help another in a place that the individual through which an energy form is operating can be of service, and the individual may not even perceive that a previous life is where the help is coming from. It isn't just a two-dimensional process, or a three, four, or a five-dimensional process, for that matter, because we have rules and regulations about these things, right? Until we don't, until it just doesn't matter anymore, because the whole thing is one. It's a little hard concept to understand. The dilemma is this: the more you grow, the less the lives are personalized. One would think that the more you're able, the more personalization occurs. But it's the reverse. Still, the necessity for feeling comfortable in your own skin at this level is strong. So one of the pertinent things about internal growth is that you're in and out of the personalization. You express personalization and suddenly you're struck with the idea that you don't agree with the personalization process, because in that particular moment, it's not about personalization. Now you have that in your head or your emotion, and you're trying to be honest about that. When you can be, has an impact on other people because they defend the personalization process extremely strongly because of the vulnerability that lies within us all. We are all vulnerable when we're engaging with life. There isn't any doubt about that. I'm not sure we can handle tremendous vulnerability all at once. Although in the old traditions, they had a word for that. It was called initiation. If you are really initiated, you almost become immobilized on the levels that you're being initiated on. It's like a shock. You are shocked into realizations that are beyond, just beyond the kin or the ability that you have to make sense of them. And they feel like avalanches of water flowing through. Yeah, slight exaggeration. I don't think that avalanche is big enough. Exaggeration in that you can actually handle it easier. It sometimes takes years to recover from it. Often there are small impacts of energy affecting a chakra, for example, so that the individual can have, over time, help in handling and remaining slightly personalized or a lot personalized, so that they can actually feel as if they're surviving through an increase in flow. Still has to do with those chakras, those Zephyros. One of the things that's really helpful is beginning slowly to engage with yourself in a manner that allows you to see those things that you don't want to see. But a suggestion is, don't get hooked on them. Don't wallow in them. You'll feel that wallowing sensation inside yourself. It hurts. It's shifting and changing the substance within the chakra that is being affected, so that you can help yourself slowly over a period of time, thus affecting other centers or chakras that might have a little bit of difficulty handling it. Changes, I mean, handling changes within them. For example, try to give you an example. One of the most difficult openings to handle is the solar plexus. Remember, one of the reasons for that is there's a relative balance in it, in your personality. It includes a lot of coming to grips with life, not necessarily in a positive or negative way. It's just coming to grips with how life has been for you. You need a will. You need a kind of sense of internal core. And to recognize that you will not always agree with how you functioned, but also have a realization that that is not necessarily considered negative from a higher perspective. Whereas often we've been taught the higher perspective will get you if you're not careful. This is really based on fear. It's based on parental background, religious background, philosophical background for that matter. Where you have disagreement among people, where you disagree, they're bad and all the rest of them are good. Typical kind of stuff. That is really constructing a zone within the relationship that you have with those who agree to validate what you're agreeing about. Makes you feel secure. Until one thing, you no longer agree with it. So it's hard for us to learn that disagreement and agreement are not necessarily of great value, except it helps us in our relationship with vulnerability. And there it is valuable. There's certain levels of pride. There are certain levels of disengagement that occur within the structure of ourselves. If you come up against something that might be, from your perspective, harmful to you, or you feel bad about harming another, emotionally, I would hope not too physically. Well, emotions are very physical. Intellectually, that's a new apple. You hurt someone intellectually, because the intellect is really tied tight with the emotional disposition, which is tied tight with the physical form. What are we talking about there? We're talking about the root center, the personalized will being in jeopardy, the gonad center. The emotional disposition having power enough to reach in and support whatever might be valid to you today. The mental, so-called mental intellectual structure. This can be used for all kinds of reasons, which everybody knows, for all kinds of jobs, all kinds of ways of thinking, all kinds of ways of engaging with others and yourself. However, if the solar plexus is engorged with flow, because unknowingly to the individual whose solar plexus is involved, she or he may have had a number of clusters of lives that relate directly to handling more energy in the solar plexus, in the root, and in the gonad center, but just not fused. So an increase in flow virtually disables the personalizations that have gone on before until recovery time. can occur. And a rethink can occur in relationship to how moments of engagement with life can begin to make a broader kind of sense rather than the same old sense that it made before. This is an energetic thing. We talk far too easily about initiation. In fact, you can be a clairvoyant, a clairaudient, a clairsentient, and become initiated and have none of that left and move into another space where you're now perceiving differently than you could before. The inner eye is expanding, and it has to do with the whole body, not with the eyes only, or the ears only, or how you need to be validated by others. In fact, a lot of soul searching, so to speak, the search of the emotion, the search of the mind, and the search of how you think and why you do things that way occurs. No perfection in that. Continuance is primary. Not giving up on yourself, vital. And when I say that, I don't mean the personality. I'm talking about the willingness to go beyond the development that you've already incurred. Nothing negative about this. Often, you need the fellowship of others that are willing to hear and listen and to begin to understand. But usually, fellowship ends at belief. It has to be broader than that. Unfortunately, that's difficult to do because groups of people engaged in beliefs run into kind of little bubbles of how things have to be based on how belief has been perceived. This is normal everywhere. This is not negative. It's just how it works. The personalization fights against moving beyond where it's personalized until the flow that comes in enables it to see beyond what it could see before. Nothing negative there. This is the same for us all. Our past lives and future lives are pixelated, engaged, vitalized. They're functional. And the idea behind reincarnation is not to be important because of them, but to realize you're a universal being. And being such a universal being means you are continually in a process of development. It's not about image making. It's not about being important. Ultimately, it's about being helpful. Having a form at this level capable enough of engaging with purposes relating to higher levels. And this is difficult for us because we are protected by the need to be the same as others are. That way you will be considered fine. It's just the nature of where we are right now. That will change. And when it does, it's confusing initially. Because all of these systems begin to churn with each other and create another form. So that you are beginning to watch that form in construction for the purpose of understanding broader, having more respect for the construction of the form that you already have, because it's how you have grown in these dimensions. But not necessarily agreeing with those all the time, or you have been trained to agree with what you believe today. But it sets you up for believing what you need to believe tomorrow to feel more comfortable. The soul has a great feeling of patience, kindness, love, if you will, compassion. Because as that flows through the personalization changing in you, you come face to face with the realization that each and every individual grows through difficulties, but also through wonderful things that occur in them. But they're like you. You're just doing it from your perspective. They're attempting to do it from theirs. This right and wrong thing becomes confusing. At a higher level, it's not confused. It's more about development at a higher level and helping energetically through a system that's been cultivated over eons of time for the purpose of being of service to others, and you begin to understand that slowly. And it's not about being head honcho. It's not about being the worst, the middles, or the ends. It's just about being where you can. That might truly be helpful for all others who are similar in nature, the nature of universal development. Ian, I'm not sure if I've covered everything here. Let me see. I said I always write a little note so I can remember, and I never look at the notes. It's always helpful. Lives are not personalized. It's more or less important. They are just a part of the creation of a form through which energy can flow. To help the souls become conscious of being a part of that universality we call spirit, God, or universal flow. Then conscious awareness of this universal intensity or flow with less interest in the personalization enables us to know the deeper purposes in what and who we are and why. We have a little ways to go on that, because anything that lies in contrast with how we believe we are is in contrast with how we believe we are, and we protect against it. You can see this in your daily life if you do your best to do so, but with one proviso: to beat yourself up about it is not helpful. To hold yourself from doing that is counterproductive in relationship to the personalization that you've already incurred. The personalization believes it must protect itself because that's the way we've been trained. And there's a great need to be okay with that, yet not necessarily agree with it. That means there must be respect for all the nonsense that we used to believe in, some of the stuff we already believe in, and some stuff that we will in the future believe in. But in and through all of that stuff will be the experience of beginning to note that there is not only flow moving through us or around us and in us, but that form that helps us is universal and has the kindest intent, most loving intent, the most universally patient and deeply understanding intent And it doesn't carry a big fist. It carries a kind of sense of need to help beyond anything that we can imagine, because for us, that is not as clear in our daily life. Well, that helps a little bit. You know? Here we have from Doug Legacy. I have no idea what this is, Doug. Feeling the sun on my face is so often a quiet moment of peace and gratitude that I wonder if the sun is an intelligent being, obviously benevolent and much higher in awareness, or is it just an aspect of my physical components? Any comments? You know, a lot of people have the animistic response to saying that the sun is truly, could you say, alive. In a way, it's alive. It keeps engaging with us in a nuclear manner. It expresses force towards us that is beneficial in our relationship with life. Without its expression, we would not exist. And if you've ever experienced any relationship with higher planes and turn your back to the sun, the glow of that gentle softness that occurs through the kind of flow or light that's touching you, that tremendous impression occurs of total and complete peace, and it softens down your intensity tremendously. At the same time, there are those who believe that if you do the same thing with a tree, put your back to a coniferous tree, for example, when you're uptight, certainly you will have the distinct sense that you are being softened. But of course, you have to have a perception of a little bit of energy moving through you. Otherwise, you're not going to notice it, because you will still be intently engaging, personalizing the remaining of the same way you have engaged a few minutes ago. You protect against shift or change. If you can let go, perhaps even meditate a wee little bit, you might soften down and recognize that flow is there. So you might also ask, are trees alive? Are other animals supported by similar systems at different levels than we are? You might be really shocked to find out that it might be true. If it were true with animals and us, could it be true with other forms of existence? It's possible. But you'll have to think about that one. Let me know what you come up with. The second question, do humans reincarnate on other planets in the 3D realm? Or is Earth an anomaly for this process? Doug has his doubts about whether Earth is an anomaly. Do reincarnations always occur in human form? Is a reincarnation an incarnation on other dimensions, or should you? I think all of that is true. But does life occur on other dimensions? I think so. I can only go by my experience, so you have to go by yours. If you disagree with that, it's okay, doesn't matter. You have the right. If you agree with it, you also have that right. Don't agree with it or disagree on my account. It's ridiculous. You're in here attempting to be and do as you can in relationship with you. The more you elevate your personalization, the harder it is to keep yourself kind of straight and honest with yourself. It's really worthwhile trying to be honest with yourself. You may not like all the stuff that's there, but don't be worried about it. You're just a person trying to engage the best you can and learning. Don't worry, there'll be all kinds of other people telling you where you're wrong and whether you're right. And don't even worry about the fact that you won't have a say in that, because you'll have a say in that too. But do the best you can. Try to back away from beating yourself up, because that comes out of fear. Fear that you won't be accepted. And you can't be accepted by everybody, because that personalization indicates how important you are for not accepting everybody, not agreeing with everybody, or agreeing with everybody, or accepting everybody. We have value judgments and all of these things, and I don't mean any disrespect by it. It's just that's what we do. That's a training we have. Very difficult to soften down that training. Very interesting if you look at everybody and know that they're emotionally based. If you look at everybody and you see that they're physically based. If you look at everybody and find there is a certain level of mental engagement within them, and you can note that you have that too, then you can understand when you have dilemmas that you cannot solve, that others might have them too. That you have dilemmas that you can solve, you might have them too. You make resolutions that you know have to be true, and you don't agree with them 2 years after, or a year, or 20 minutes. You must know that others have that too. Very difficult to respect yourself with your anomalies. Very worthwhile to do so, because then you know for sure there's movement within. If you know for sure there's movement within and you can perceive it to some degree, energy will follow that thought and broaden out movement within. But even more wonderful, increase your relationship with being consciously aware of that which goes on within. Not about the memorization of how you should be or not be, but that helps you to do what you can so you can go beyond where you are now. Don't give up on you. Others will. From time to time, you do too. Now's the time to have a will, not to necessarily agree with you. Thanks, everybody. I think that's about all we have time.